I want to thank everyone for coming to Hello Future Buzz Twitter Space, September 23rd. And I'm really excited to have Jim Nasr and Debra Farber, and as well as Tom Screen on. And as we all are, I was on Twitter earlier today, and I saw this tweet that asked, in one word, what breaks relationships? And it really struck me. I put a poll up. I hope everyone goes to take the poll. But the trust, expectations, maturity, and doubt were at the high factors of the replies. And in healthcare, trust has got to be the number one issue. So I'm really excited to have Debra, our privacy guru, who's working on a white paper for Hedera, and Jim Nasr. I look forward to hearing how you decided healthcare was your focused area. And also Tom Screen is in the UK-based entrepreneur who's co-founder of Everywhere, WARE, that along with other development projects has worked on the healthcare system in the United Kingdom, the NHS, the National Healthcare System. Is that it, Tom? You want to say?
National Health Service.
Oh, service. Okay.
But
so you want to introduce yourself to everyone? Tom?
I co-founded Everywhere like 6 years ago now. Me and my business partner John, and it's been a journey. And we've been working with Hedera for the past 12 months, pretty much now. So getting on for 100 million transactions, which is going to be a huge milestone. And all of that has come about via healthcare, really, which really wasn't something that I don't think either of us were expecting when we started off. And certainly in the UK, if anybody's aware of working with public sector in the UK, it's a tricky beast to get into. So it wasn't something that we started out with an expectation to do. But it'd be interesting to get Jim's perspective on this as well, and obviously in a different geography. But I guess you could look at it from one perspective and say the opportunities are there, but that's because I suppose as well it's an area that is in need of innovation. And yes, and as you said, Elizabeth, then all those factors come into play. Trust and expectations, and
Jim, how did you focus on healthcare as an industry in your career, basically? And now you're working with on the Hedera platform, but what made you gravitate towards healthcare?
Well, when you play sports and like school and you're like the slowest and fattest, you're the very last one picked. It was kind of like that. It was a process of elimination. I'm just teasing. Let's put it this way. It is certainly, as I would echo what Tom is saying, it's if you're glutton for punishment and you enjoy sufferfest thing, then it's one for you. I kind of I on a slightly more serious note, I had a startup and we built a lot of software and I had an exit, and I was really interested in kind of at that time, just about 6-7 years ago, machine learning, AI around health data and things like this. And then after about a year of investing in it and learning things and doing some bits and bobs, I realized that actually what I really needed to do was to understand healthcare a whole lot better and understand healthcare data better. So I was fortunate to kind of, I guess serendipitously wind up at the Centers for Disease Control here in Atlanta, and I was the chief software architect there and learned a lot about public health. And again, would echo what Tom is saying. It's not at all easy. It's one of those industries where there are a lot of opportunities. It's an incredibly profligate industry here in the U.S. for sure, and I don't think the U.K. is a whole lot better, but a little bit better for sure. But it is also a bastion for really kind of like just some fiefdoms. There are a few very big companies that kind of just really monopolize the large majority of interest, influence, money, and things like this. And even in public health, obviously I was working for the federal government. Unfortunately, a lot of the money is channeled to what I would categorize the usual suspects of system integrators, whose primary interest is to put butts in the seats, offer very little real value, however, generate massive volumes in a stable cash cow business. All to say, I'm not going to dissect everything that's wrong in healthcare in the U.S., but it's lots of opportunity, difficult to get into. It's not necessarily that for the faint of heart if you're an entrepreneur, but I was fortunate to kind of one way or the other kind of I guess figure out my way through the path. And then since then it's been more intentional, where we kind of think we have a point of view, we have good amount of domain expertise and credibility now in certain areas, and also really kind of have a sense for where we think we can come up with with our resources and approach with innovation that can actually I guess in the proverbial saying move the needle. So that's what we're trying to do, right? That's our focus. Though Acor, though, just to be clear, we are a technology company. We build technologies that are generally horizontal, not necessarily specific to healthcare. However, since our focus from a business development background, credibility and things like this is healthcare, it winds up that's really our primary focus.
Well, but I think that you made your technology and your business skills, as well as your public service background, and if people didn't understand that, Jim used to work for the CDC, and in today's world, a few years ago, most Americans did not know the CDC even existed, and in the past 18 months, we've discovered that it's a very important agency in our lives. So.
Yes, it's become a 4-letter word now.
But your expertise there's nothing like institutional memory, in my opinion. Having experienced a situation is different from having said, I studied it and I understand it. When you're really in the environment of what's going on, you get a feeling in your bones that this is happening or that is happening. So I'm really excited that you've taken your public experience and translated it into the tech and business skills of healthcare, because it's such an important thing. And having built on Hedera, one of the issues for me personally is, I don't mind passports or this or that, but I just want to know where my data is going. That's why, I'm really excited that Debra, you have come to our Twitter Spaces again, and you can speak to us about healthcare and how privacy is so important for us. How are you today?
Sure, I'm doing well, thanks. How do you want me to frame this in terms of my experience in privacy and healthcare? Or, I think it might be a good place to
I kind of
start.
wanted this to be a non-technical discussion. So many of our spaces are technical, and really it's about the trust layer that perhaps Hedera gives us. A trust factor is number one in people's minds when it comes to healthcare. So if you could speak to that, that would be probably welcome in the community.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I guess at first I'll tell you that back in 2010, I was the first chief privacy officer for the advisory board company, which has now since been purchased by United Health Group and was a giant DC established consulting firm to the healthcare industry. Jim, I'm not even sure. Do you know the advisory board company or not? But regardless, so I was like the HIPAA person. I was steeped in it. I read the 88-page law inside and out. I had parts of it memorized because literally it would always be, can we do this? HIPAA says no. I want to be able to be let me find you a way, right? I don't want to be the person of no, but HIPAA is the law in the United States is very specific and has a very specific healthcare focused, risk-based, approach that people must follow. And it's different from other laws like global privacy laws like GDPR in that those are based on principles and a little less specific and gives you more flexibility and arguably more room for innovation. And in the United States, in the past years, we've had these federal laws that are very sectoral. And so healthcare, we have HIPAA for, for financial services, we have, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act and, credit, credit-related privacy laws, and it's very sectoral for us. And so, with healthcare as a practitioner in healthcare, like a privacy practitioner in healthcare, I absolutely hated it. Like, quite honestly, I just didn't feel like I was set up for success in helping with innovation. But I learned so much, and so Jim is right that there's just the healthcare industry needs this tech. It needs more technology generally, and more people who understand how to use the technology. The problem in the United States is that that healthcare consistently underfunds, specifically like hospitals and stuff, experts in privacy and security. They pay very low, way below salaries below the normal wages for that. So therefore you're not getting, like, I don't want to say top people, but you're not getting people who are looking to get paid what they're worth, right? Like, it ends up being not an ideal place to do privacy and security unless you're super passionate about it, and that's what drives you. So what I like about Hedera for healthcare is that it's building this trust layer, and then it creates this trust layer that then people like Jim and Tom can build on top of in order to abstract some of the unusable to the everyday person ways in which you have to manipulate data to make, Jim is making an abstraction using hash rights, and it makes it so that you can prove things about healthcare. You could prove, that you consented to a particular trial or procedure, or that you withdrew your consent at a certain point and said you couldn't use it anymore. But also many other, rights beyond privacy. And as a result, this gives more trust to his clients, to Tom's clients, right? Like, it is basically another, by abstracting this solution, you are, like, a hospital would be able to maybe plug into Hedera without having to have people on staff that had, like, crazy levels of expertise in data interoperability and privacy and security and data records management and all of the things you need to kind of have to protect the data in a large organization, or if it's mission critical for your organization. This makes it easier to just kind of plug and play into that assurance and trust layer.
Jim, would you like to expand on what Debra was saying about adding a trust layer onto healthcare records and things?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously, as well, let me take a step back. A lot of this, kind of the genesis behind why you would even need a trust layer or infrastructure for healthcare is that fundamentally, and I think people are really understanding this now, and many did before, though many of that, that it wasn't really kind of democratized, right? But there's value in healthcare data, and I think really every day is increasing. I think typically that the healthcare value for data was around clinical data. That's the traditional type data, but I think as we all kind of know now, there's significant value really in the trifecta of health-related data, which is clinical, genomic, and then also essentially what's referred to as patient-generated or wearables or sensor-based, however you want to call it, right? So the real idea and the real reason why you need a layer of trust is that the data is not clean. It's not in one nice place. It's not nicely, kind of formatted, monitored, and interoperable. It's really what we call siloed. It's in lots and lots of different, code production systems, some of which could be nothing more than like an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, seriously. In fact, some of which could be literally fax documents.
I can back that up.
Yeah, right. I mean,
You get those, Tom?
Everything Jim's saying is true of the UK as well, to a greater or lesser extent. So
yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it is true, and in fact, in some areas, like some parts of the world, and this is, to be honest, this is where I feel like people like us can actually materially move the needle. If you look at like many countries in Africa, as example, they're not at the level of our electronic health record digitization. Sometimes their health record is nothing more than like a notebook with pieces of loose paper. However, they have kind of the ambition and also the technology, particularly open source technologies there right now, to really leap forward and in fact use technologies like Hedera, as example, and really build in privacy by design, infrastructure for trust by design, etc. Right, and also do it cost effectively. Do it with an army of young people, who are available and are kind of competent. Privacy by design, infrastructure. Yeah.
I think that's a whole interesting tangent to the conversation in general when you talk about how developing economies can leapfrog, established economies. I mean, speaking of Africa, I mean, you could look at how they've gone sort of straight to mobile, whereas we're, to an extent, still struggling with landlines. And I mean, even paper records in the UK, they're still around predominantly, I think. And I mean, it's well known, certainly from in the media, or and over the past sort of couple of decades, there have been various well-documented attempts to digitize paper, all the paper records for patients in the UK, and those projects have been widely touted as being failures, and a lot of that comes from expectations, which interesting we sort of talk about at the beginning. So, yeah,
no doubt, Tom. To kind of wrap up my very scenic tour of your answer, Elizabeth, really, the reason why we need technologies like Hedera, and then people like us, myself, Tom, and other good folks here, building essentially what I think of as middle layer applications for healthcare and using technologies like Hedera is that really there's no doubt that there's massive value in the data. We are all becoming a consumer-oriented and consumerized kind of world. All of us are on our phones and are realizing that. And then, it's just not possible to just say, well, let's create this magical kind of pristine singular data source of everything that's healthcare for like Jim, and make it available to everyone. That's just like, that ship may never come, to be honest with you, just because it's not practical. So then the question is, well, how do you kind of cajole together and string together all these disparate data sources and people who, essentially almost are preternaturally opposed to working together, that they're incentivized not to work together. How do you get them to kind of share data in an interoperable, secure, trustworthy way? And that's really where we kind of come in. We are thinking around, for instance, Hedera and like RiceHash and things like this, because we think that kind of transposition of like a trust layer of software can actually make that happen. In lieu of having this like kind of brilliant, clean, well formatted data central store.
I definitely agree with you there. It's like the bottom up approach to make this happen is what's happening. It's coming about not because of top down edicts from government departments saying this must all be connected and this must all be digitalized. It's happening because one of those things that you said was you're working with people that want to be innovative, and I think it's the same for us. We find that in hospitals and in innovation hubs in hospitals around the country, there are people that are very passionate about using new technology and investigating new technology and trying to put that to work to make life better, especially these days. Whether that's because of underfunding it's because of all those things, underfunding. I was going to mention sort of the value in, you talk about value in healthcare data, asset management, being able to use your assets more efficiently. There are a lot of people that want to make it better. And I think gradually, as we can demonstrate that there's value in these use cases, whether that's privacy in your patient data or consent data, and I guess sort of Jim and I probably have almost the different sides of those, with ACOR focusing more on the patient-centric data, and obviously everywhere focusing on more of the sort of asset, maybe infrastructure-centric data.
Jim, you said something about people not wanting to work together. Is that a big issue in the healthcare industry?
in one word, yes.
Oh,
It's, and there's a historical thread to this, right? And not that, we necessarily want to digress that far, but, the net of it is that you have certain stakeholders, such as, insurance companies, providers, patients, of course, and the government regulators. There's a few depending on what scenario you're looking at, and they're really the incentivization, particularly how efficiently you got paid, and things like this, has been set up largely to be kind of combative. And for instance,
Oh, wow.
insurance companies and healthcare providers. That's a classic example, right? So some of this could, and I think is slowly being improved. Particularly, I think some of the regulations around removal of information blocking, the Cures Act here in the U.S., is definitely kind of a step in the right direction. But this is an entrenched. I mean, imagine like you're trying to. What was I forget the name of that tanker that was stuck in the Suez canal. Imagine that, right? This is not going to move that quickly, and it won't be easy, and it'll require like 1,000 people pushing and pulling, and the will of like lots of people to make it happen. But the reality also, honestly, is that I give you an example. So in the U.S., your health record is legally owned by the EHR system, right? Yeah. So Cerner or
But
Epic or
ESR,
whatever.
what's ESR?
Yeah, the electronic health record system, right? So the software, right? Which is kind of an absurd thing, right? Because that's just, if a provider happened to choose a particular software, how would that kind of stipulate that they would actually own like Jim's health record? It doesn't really make sense. But nonetheless, where I'm going with this is that, all these kind of like pods, if you like, and like little islands have been there, and it's been really economically better for these stakeholders not to work together, right? Because that and again, this is we could spend hours talking about opacity and how there's almost no transparency in healthcare here in the U.S. As example, you just look at one of your explanation of benefits, right? One of your EOBs, particularly if you go to like have a procedure and there's like 15 different codes. I can almost guarantee you there's not a single person, whether it's a hospital or your physician insurance, that can explain to you all the codes or justification behind it. I mean, I'm truthful about that. I'm not exaggerating. So anyway, that's kind of it. It was a colorful answer to a simple, kind of yes. That's the problem.
And Deborah, with regard to people's in this ESS thing, the database, is this data held on actual hard drive servers or is it in the cloud? Do you know?
I'm sorry. Are you talking about electronic health record data?
Yes.
So I'm not entirely sure because I've been out of healthcare like specifically for a while, but because at the time they were not, healthcare was like the last to move to cloud. So I was not there during those times, but I would assume that Epic and Cerner and the like, they probably have some cloud like HIPAA cloud, like compliant cloud. Jim, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth, it's kind of like an all over the place, to be honest with you. I mean, some of the more modern EHR, electronic health record providers, they are cloud based, like Athena, as example. They're cloud based and a little bit more modern. Most of the kind of like the traditional like power brokers in the space, Epic, Cerner, they're really actually their technology is based on, if you can believe it, 1970s software called mumps. And the data is stored, and it's not really where the data is stored that's the issue. That's it's a partial issue, but these days we're able to be very clever at the infrastructure level. The real issue is how it's stored, right? The format with which it's stored, and the fact that it's really not in any shape or form modern. So you gotta kind of like like somebody like me basically would have to look at that data in our language, kind of pre-process it, transform it to machine readable, build a data dictionary, normalize it, do all kinds of validation, and then eventually make it interoperable using modern technology such as what's called FHIR, which is a standard. It stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, but basically is healthcare APIs, similar to internet. But that thing that I just mentioned, that like 30 seconds description, that's a lot of work. That could be years and years of work, right? That's the issue, right?
Wow.
It's that it's old systems storing things in proprietary old ways. Honestly, I mean, I'm not going to give you the name of a specific vendor here because I don't think it's appropriate, but I'm just going to give you a little real example. We do a lot of work around mortality data, people who die, and particularly around tracking the opioid substance abuse, which before COVID, what was certainly the biggest public health issue in the US. Over 1 million people have died in the last 20 years through opioids. And COVID kind of certainly took the thunder from at least a PR perspective, but it's a huge issue. But where I'm going with this is that there are systems, there are like, for instance, debt certification systems that are kind of by design code non-interoperable. Like there's no way to get to the data other than like physically logging into the system, which is
Wow.
kind of ludicrous in 2021, right? I mean, it's like the exact opposite of how we want to build software.
Right. So let's say that the work you're doing, Jim and Tom, is 3 to 5 years out. How much of an improvement within our data from a general populist sense that our data is more accessible and secure? What do you think, Jim?
I mean, Elizabeth, I would say, it's funny because I'm going to be a little bit, I guess, persnickety about this. Your first statement, is our work 3 to 5 years out? I don't think so. I think it's actually immediate. That there's value right now, and we can pick and kind of point to specific cases. I think that the work that Tom has done, with vaccines and infrastructure asset management in the UK as example, and other things we've done, are examples. There are many examples. But then having also said that, I think the actual payoff is probably more like a decade or two out, right? So it's kind of it's a funny thing, I don't think you're going to see that the larger kind of en masse value and kind of manifestation of what we're doing in a year or two or 4 or 5. However, there is plenty to do like this moment, like right now, and I think there's plenty of proof around that. So with that being said, I think really kind of our goal, with what we're doing is to figure out, where's the beachhead, what's practical, what can we do now, and really looking ultimately, it's an interoperability issue at the heart of what we're trying to do, and then like allowing data to be observed, not necessarily moved or copied, just observed when it needs to be, but in a way that's trustworthy, in a way that's accountable, privacy preserving, all the things that Debra has mentioned, many times, and we think, and by the way, I'm a real big believer that there is a huge opportunity for this community. I mean, specifically the Hedera community. I'm not generalizing to crypto or software development, but specifically Hedera, for the reasons that I think a lot of us know what Hedera brings to the picture, to actually be, kind of like the real driving innovators and protagonists, in driving healthcare innovation trustworthiness forward. Because I think that the moment is here, but Hedera offers things that others don't, and this community gets it, and I think a lot of us have a longer term perspective here than is HBAR 38 or 39 or 42 or whatever. So I think being HBAR keepers, and I think a lot of us are, that perspective really helps. Clearly, Mance, Lehman, that's the vision they've laid out. And I think so much of like what we do, and I'm going to stipulate, or I'm going to project that maybe Tom's thinking is similar too, just building stuff, is the fact that these guys are not, kind of fly by night. Because nothing, in healthcare and then things that we're doing can be fly by night. It's got to be very conservative. It's got to be long term. It's got to be based on a whole lot of like sound management and things like this. And again, honestly, like I'm excited about HBAR Foundation, just as last segue, because if you can convince these guys that look, there's a multi-decade opportunity to really drive, not just drive innovation in healthcare, but really drive value and increase HBAR keeper kind of value and the TPS for the network, all this, if you dedicate some time, money, attention, resources to building like the next layer of infrastructure for startups everywhere to use Hedera for healthcare. I think that to me is exciting, and hopefully they have the vision to think like this.
Well, I know that the HBAR keepers in our community that I interact with on Twitter all the time they're so strong and ethical at their core and are just wonderful people. I mean, they say thank you and they don't FUD or pump because we're strong in knowing that HBAR is hello future. So I think in terms of what you're saying about healthcare, putting one step and then the next step and then the next step and building the blocks for a generational change is really what the Hederians are all about. So, kudos to the community and thank you, Jim, for acknowledging the community's role. I know that over 200 applications have already gone into the foundation, and it's only been, I don't know, a week from last Thursday was the 2-year anniversary.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of applications start to see the light of day out of that. I imagine there's going to be a lot of great ideas that are going to be followed up. Yeah,
the 200 in a week, and as HBAR gets known and the trust layer and all the things that other cryptos might not. It's not really crypto. It's as Lehman always says, he's building 100-year foundation.
Yeah, I mean that's the way that we always look at it. I think, and we've probably touched on this, I think a few months ago when we were sort of saying, do we talk about blockchain in terms of crypto, or do you talk about distributed ledger? And and in business we talk about trust and provenance and interoperability and all these kind of words. So I think it's a slightly different perspective on that. And I think just to back up a little bit and support what Jim was saying about building value. I mean, it does go to a little bit of what he was saying right at the beginning about healthcare can become siloed between the system integrators. It's hard for new companies to get into that, but you sort of go into it, and then once you do get in, you realize that the solutions that you're putting in there are going to be in for a long time, which is good from a business perspective, but it's also from a personal perspective. You're sort of thinking, well, yeah, you've really got to get it right, because it's not just another business that's building on your software. It's public health, and it's I sort of take that seriously. So when you look into evaluate something like how does DLT work in that space, or even how do you prove that IoT more generally is appropriate for some of these things, it's a step-by-step approach to one day hopefully reach that utopia. And whether that's 10 or 20 years, I don't know. Certainly in the short term, you've got to prove out a value case. You've got to be able to say, well, what we're doing right now has some value, but that there's a much bigger picture that is going to build gradually over time. And, I think that will become, the value will probably increase exponentially as these things connect together. It's a bit like the way that we see the value of the internet growing as more and more systems become connected together and more people become connected together. And I think DLT is going to accelerate that. And obviously I see IoT accelerating that in terms of just the reach of technology into our everyday lives, and whether that's sensors or just connectivity generally, and being able to make things more efficient.
I was going to ask you if any of your business decisions, along with the structure of the of Hedera, was it driven by transaction costs or monetary business decision?
100%. Yeah, no doubt about it, Elizabeth. And I think that if you're, again, you guys have probably heard me say this kind of like being practical. I think that's really part of it, because end of the day, I'm not Google, right? We can't afford to like just spend and hope that one out of 100 projects becomes 1,000x return. So yeah, we got to be very, very diligent and really kind of careful about where we invest, and just the rationale behind it. But also, like, are we going to get return on investment, right? Because it's super easy to just kind of be curious and spend a lot of money, but it's fine if it's OPM, other people's money, but in this case, it's not. So yeah, for sure. I think, just being serious, our use cases I consider as being high utility. So lots of kind of use, like everyday, every man uses, high transactions, but low fee and low variability. So low cost or no cost, as an abstracted cost. There's obviously a cost if you're using a public infrastructure, and then low variability, because people in healthcare, if I go to them and say, hey, look, just simple example, our cost for our software this month is 5,000. Next month it could be anywhere from 2,000 to 38,000. That just they'll give me a robust kick up the bottom, and that'll be it, right? You got to be a lot more stable. You got to have a lot more control over your kind of cost of goods and things like this to make it happen. So without a shadow of a doubt, that's a big part of it.
Along that line, Deborah, when you're talking with different companies, including Hedera, and you're advocating for privacy, is that a factor that they come up with? Like, number one, is it how much is this going to cost me?
Oh gosh, so the people that I've been working with via Hedera usually are already in my network and come to me and go, like, I'm building this thing, but I'd like to talk to you about Hedera because I've been working on, I don't know, Ethereum or something else. And, so then price becomes like an obvious differentiator. And then I would say before that, like my life before DLT and the world of it has been that companies look at privacy and security and see them, unfortunately, as compliance and sunk costs and not revenue generating and something you just have to do. So what is the minimum we need to do, Debra, in order to check the boxes and have nobody be upset with us, whether that means regulators or lawsuits or whatever. And that is the past. I think that way of thinking can no longer last in today's emerging world. And the reason for that, I know this is getting away from just cost, but the reason for that is that it's no longer a matter of like new regulations say you have to do things and therefore you do it. And I heard Jim say this before, like now it's market demands, like the customers, individuals are demanding more trusted healthcare, more transparency, more privacy, more security. And we're starting to see brands like completely like even big tech make some major changes as a result, because like they want market share and their market is demanding these things. So as a result, if you need to get more trust, more privacy, more security, more transparency, and all these things, Hedera is just people who are seeking this, when they see Hedera, their eyes light up and go, this can't be, like, because if so, why haven't I heard of it? And where has this been hiding? Because this is exactly what I need to lower my costs, to make it efficient, to make it build privacy assurances and security assurances and all that by design into our tech stack.
Oh, that's like an awesome perspective, because to the demand for something is going to outweigh compliance every day of the week.
100%.
If a company knows that their customers are demanding this, I'm sure they're willing to spend more and have it be a quicker turnaround than if I have to comply with some government regulation.
Right, because by then you already have a product, you built it, your P&L would be affected. The executive who's in charge of, having to do the compliant thing now has to has more losses, and then he needs more profit to make up for that. Otherwise he won't get his bonus, right? So there's been this, other effects of just being in a, the bureaucracy and infighting and politics of being in a company. But this is outside of that. This is existential. I think this is an existential threat right now to a lot of like centralized big tech companies, that they need to basically change their ways and kind of move to more decentralization. And you're even seeing this with Facebook, who I'm not a fan of, but Facebook, they're like, what, you don't like our glasses we came out with? Like, the new version of like a Google glasses, but now with Ray-Bans and Facebook. Well, you know what? All the keys are we don't store them. They're all stored on the phone, and it's in a separate app, and the customer has all this, right? Even they're trying to parrot the line that they're decentralizing their operations. And that is a good way to start doing it, although the company has its own challenges overall. So yes, it's definitely market demands, and it is happening. And it's the only reason I'm able to have like work right now outside of working within a large tech company that would pay me to do work, right? To pay me to help them be compliant or do the right things or whatnot. In the past, there was just no market demand for someone to create, like there's no new, everything was already built, right? And now it's just like, just transferred over to cloud or transferred over here. Now we've got like new innovations that Hedera is unlocking, and new economies. And so that brings new opportunities for privacy and security and everything else, just opportunity. And the world sees it. Now, not everyone is as embedded into this space as we are. We're all, look, I'm on a weekly, Twitter Spaces talk with you on this very topic, but this isn't the norm. We're very small group of people, and there's just so much potential. So, most people don't know that we're on a path that it looks good and is going, I think, to better trust on the internet, better, humanity overall, and provide, transparency and efficiencies, and, just be able to have more control over things and disintermediate third parties. That's all happening, right? And it's all happening without having to, like, I don't know, lean out against regulation, right? So this is the reason I joined with Hedera, because it was just so obvious to me that they stand above the rest as being a professional company built for enterprises that need to have certain tool sets and capabilities, and, well, trust that they're not a fly-by-night company, as Jim said.
Well, when you mentioned earlier about HIPAA, I know in the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, well, HIPAA takes care of my records, and my doctor has HIPAA, so everything's fine. And I don't mind if a vaccine passport or whatever is happening. And then you find out that HIPAA is not what you think. I didn't think, I had no idea, because I'm not even in the industry, but I just thought, oh, my records are safe. And that's not at all what HIPAA is. So I think what Jim and Tom and you and your privacy are doing are so important to every single person, because our health records are really important to us. So
Yeah, and just to give, so the legislation itself, there's really 3 points, and the main point of HIPAA was for interoperability of healthcare data sets. Like, that's the main point. And then added on to that is the privacy rule, which is separate, and then the security rule. And those are 88 pages just between the privacy rule and the security rule. So like HIPAA's giant and ginormous. And the whole point was the world was going from paper records for healthcare and going to digital. And whoa, look at all of the potential, risks that might happen if we do that. And absolutely, you make information more accessible by making it digital. There's more privacy problems to prevent. There's more security challenges and new systems. So, the law was really well thought out, but it doesn't allow a lot of room for flexibility, or you got to do your risk-based assessments, and that's a lot. If you're a big company. It's a lot if you have a lot of different processes and such. But I wouldn't go so far as to say like HIPAA. Like, I'm not going to trash the law itself, but I do think it is something different than what most people think it is. It's, from a it's really telling you how do you protect the information, but then there's also like some exceptions for public policy and public health. So it's not like you always have it's not like HIPAA rule. Like, there's rules in there that you wouldn't even think. And here's one I'm just going to throw out there because I think it's just bizarre, and you probably haven't heard this anywhere else. But when I was at IBM as a consultant to the federal government and to some healthcare companies, so it was federal government agencies and healthcare companies, and California, like, basically, I had to help California's prison system move from paper records to electronic, and so that they can improve their so fewer people actually died while in prison without achieving the care that they needed. That was the problem. And in trying to help with that, there's actually like rules around whether or not you're required by law to give notice to prisoners, because just the use cases they really thought about and risk modeled and thought about the different potential like downstream individuals and classes of individuals of different processes and contexts in which you need to do different things. So it isn't, I don't want to shit on HIPAA, but I just didn't like working within the world of HIPAA as a practitioner. And it doesn't mean that you can't, abide by your local country's public health requirements. All it means is that the public health needs to make sure that it is secure, it's safe from the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the security around it's all, complies with the HIPAA security rule. You have the policies in place. Like from the outside, you're not going to know the difference. This is more about internal obligations for the company and for medical staff to be trained on privacy. Like that's a different can of worms.
Well, I just wanted to jump in because I wanted to ask what sort of happens, or because that sounds like HIPAA, and I don't know the details of that, or to be honest with you, or what the equivalent might be in the UK.
GDPR.
Okay, so GDPR, and before, we have Data Protection Act, obviously, before that anyway.
Yes.
But I just remember, and I just had to Google it in the background, that there was an incident a couple of years ago now. And I remember reading about the time and sort of thinking about it since, that Google managed to get hold of something like 50 million patient records and a whole bunch of NHS patient records and American health, patient records. And and obviously, being in, Jim mentioned, we're all wearing wearables and things like that now. So even with healthcare, even with sort of privacy legislation in place, there are still ways that companies, these massive companies, can get hold of and hopefully anonymized data sets, but who knows? And that's part of the problem, isn't it? It's like, how do we actually know? And I guess maybe it's rhetorical the answer is something like Hedera, because then obviously we can have control of our own data and authorize where it goes. But that, I suppose, that for me is quite worrying.
Yeah. So Tom, I'm actually intimately familiar with this. Just because at the time I knew some of the regulators, etc. So this is what you're describing is from November of, I think, 2018, if I remember
2019,
correctly.
something like that. And I might got some of the details wrong. So
no, you have it right. This is Google and Ascension Health. Now, the reason why this was not illegal and wasn't, some kind of a fraud or whatever, is that Google, like many other organizations, has what is called a BAA with Ascension Health, which means that it's called a Business Associate Agreement, which means that they are not the covered entity, right? When it comes to HIPAA, which means that so it'd be pretty simple. Imagine I am as a covered entity, all HIPAA things comply or are requirements for me, but then you are my kind of BAA partner, which means that really none of those things apply to you. So long as I'm like, Tom is kosher, life is good. I'm simplifying it, obviously, dumbing it down.
Yeah.
Right. But the big issue, though, was nobody knew about this, not the physicians, not the patients. And the way that this was found out was that some employees at Google basically saw this. And I believe they saw not just anonymized records, but also like fully raw records. Now, the premise here was that Google was going to look at this in aggregate to fine-tune machine learning and use that to improve algorithms that then they would put back into the public domain.
That was my understanding as well. It's cool. They made it sound like there was a noble pursuit.
Exactly. But I mean, at the very least, it was an incredibly creepy way of going about doing it. But really, I mean, this is one of those things where it's like, really, so we're going to take just your word for it, because that's literally all it is. There's no evidence at all that what they said is actually true. None of we don't, and this is really part of the thinking of like, well, how does Hedera or what we're doing with consent tracking and things like this fit in? And it's really this idea in an extreme way to prevent, or at the very least, to have the ability to monitor when these things are happening, right?
Yeah.
Especially now where I think since that time that there's a lot more of a kind of a heightened sensitivity to this from the general people. I think at that time it was kind of by the by, and now people didn't really know too much about it. But that's really part of it. Is this idea of like, show the authenticity of this action, and then honestly, and this is the part that actually really bugs me, to be honest with you, is that there's a cottage industry of data aggregators who make enormous money where they take data, through this BAAs, they kind of aggregate them. Sometimes they anonymize them, whatever, and then they sell that data back to like researchers, to public health, whatever, at a very, very large, kind of profits, huge profits. And then what they do is that they actually attach their own private key to it. So now that becomes their own like walled garden, right?
Right.
But nobody, like, I don't know if they use my data. I certainly don't get any kind of compensation for it. So it creates this wonderful like secondary like massive marketplace. Yet none of the actual owners of the data have any clue about this. That they're not consulted about it. They don't provide consent to it. So they can't monitor it. They certainly don't get compensated. And to me, that all those things are just wrong.
Oh, I mean, it completely goes back to that first point that Elizabeth was making about trust again, and this it's accountability, and it obviously a completely different case. And Debra happened to mention Facebook a few minutes ago that it's like these things come out in the news that, oh, and by the way, Facebook managed to get around having Zuckerberg and Sandberg be questioned because they just paid off somebody.
I read that
$5 billion over their $100 million fine, and
now there's
so
a
they didn't have to be
shareholder
questioned
lawsuit as a result.
Yeah, so
not shareholder, the board members.
Exactly. So it's like when things like that can go on, isn't it? It's like, is it no wonder that there's like not trust in the big companies, and then obviously lack of trust in governments, and I think it's just. And maybe that's why we're here as a community as well, right? Because we're all searching for something. We're all looking for what is the answer to this. We've got ourselves into this collective situation. I think one way or another, blockchains are going to save us, right?
And Tom, by the way, this is on a serious note. This is why I was mentioning a little bit earlier about the whole HBAR Foundation and the power of the collective. Because look, you can have leverage. I mean, if you and I are just banging our head and at the door of the Senate or whatever about this stuff, I mean, it's just nothing. It's noise, right? And nobody's going to pay any attention. And unfortunately, most of the regulators at that level are generally very, very clueless when it comes to these things that we're talking about. However, now if we could use the collective function, leverage, power, resources of us, the community, and some kind of a mechanism, resources, including things like lobbyists or whatever, and actually address this in a more strategic way, and not just like catch as catch can, right? And hope for the best, but strategically and say, look, let's bring this back to this 100-year vision and actually doing important things. This is important. You could actually make a difference. At the very least, you could educate some of these people, because honestly, I've been there with these regulators. I mean, they wouldn't know blockchain, from chain of blocks. I mean, really, it's just, to me, it's hard for them to conceive of doing these things in a way without having some kind of a entity, like a third party, if you like, advocacy group, it could be that at the very least, to push them and ask the right questions at the very least.
Yeah, and it's also finding that fine balance, as well as just sort of going back to that, having some value in that, having the business case, but aligning that with those bigger picture goals as well, as saying, well, we can make the world a better place, but we can also do that in the context of running a business in the way that obviously needs to run in the real world.
Well, we have one community member who has a comment or question for our speakers. So if you'd like to speak, Jay, go right ahead.
Hi guys, great job so far. I just joined, but from what I can hear, it's been an active session. Um, I guess maybe I missed this, or maybe someone already mentioned it, but most of the people, and myself included, tend to not read end user license agreements, especially on apps and software and wearables and things of that nature, and are probably, I'd say 99% of people don't realize that all this data is being aggregated and sold and parsed to various, like you already said, Jim, there are people making tons of money um, off of our willingness to give them the data. And I think I'm just happy to see Debra and the team and everybody making people aware that their data is valuable, and that if they had a way using Hedera to build kind of like not only your IDs and everything else that you want to put on it, but you could, give the keys to people that you want to give them to, and maybe even get paid for it. So actually monetize, the fact that you understand that your data is valuable. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. You make a really good point. I think we were speculating about this a little bit earlier in the webinar. I'm just going to repeat it. To me, yeah, certainly blockchain can play a role, but to me, this is a user experience issue. This is a nudging from an opt-in already, and then you choosing to opt out versus the other way, right? Because when you're already opted in, essentially you have to change the inertia, you have to take steps, you have to read TNCs, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are really kind of prohibitors for you to kind of do what you really want to do, which is to get onto the app and do whatever it is you want to do. But when it comes to something this important, particularly if there's monetary value, or if there's sensitive data and things that can be that has repercussions beyond like a specific transaction, I think that the nudging needs to be the other way, right? Where you're not opted in, but then there's an incentive for the application builders to make it super clear on what exactly it is they're doing, to make it very clear that they're accountable, they're compliant, they're following, the California Consumer Protection Act or whatever it happens to be, because now they're going to make money through your informed, like not informed consent in a clinical trial kind of way, but through your informed acknowledgement and agreement. And then if they're doing that, chances are they're willing to share a slice of the benefits with you, right? That's fundamentally, I think and I think going back to kind of what we do with Rice Hash and things like this, a lot of it really, end of the day, is can you abstract this blockchain stuff in a way that changes usability, so individuals know their rights and have a real say about their rights.
No, it's perfectly said. That's awesome. That's exactly it. Having to opt in. I mean, it was the whole thing with COVID tracking. Like when the forces of nature came down with Apple and Samsung, I don't think a lot of people realized that there was technology enabling certain tracking mechanisms going on, and some people picked up on it. It's a very slippery slope, and it just I my mind goes into rabbit holes pretty quick based on what I do in a day. But yeah, anyway.
Well, I think that's what Debra, your whole privacy interest and your whole career has been built off of your interest in people's data and how they should be in control of their own data.
Yeah, it's so funny because I am not a person that anyone would be like, oh, Debra's a really private person. She doesn't share much. Like, if anything, it might be oversharing, right? So I don't consider myself someone who, but I respect I respect people and I respect choices, and I like to be asked for things and not forced, right? So it truly resonates with me that the cause of what I think privacy is, and that's different than what a lot of the people in the crypto space think privacy is, where they think anonymization equals privacy. But I think privacy is about Debra Farber.
I think that's worth. I think that's worth. I mean, I know your view on that, but I think that's worth just spending a few seconds on privacy versus privacy. What people think.
I'm sorry, privacy versus
what people think is privacy and what actual privacy and
Okay, yeah. So in the crypto space, some people think that anonymity equals privacy. And if you're not anonymous, you have no privacy. And I like to make the distinguish, like that's like saying, okay, people who pull the plug out of their computer and it's no longer online have great security. Right? Yes,
right.
they're not there's no security problem online, theoretically, from your computer. Uh, uh, I see we have the great Katie Masuris on the line here, so I want to be very articulate about security. But so I look at that as like a non-starter when we're talking about protecting privacy. Go and unplug. That's what being anonymous is, and that's the conversation that's being had across most of crypto. But privacy is about being like me showing up saying, I'm Debra Farber, I'm in this Twitter space, but I am choosing and I have choice between what to share in a public space. And that by default, any product that I'm using should have the most restrictive settings so that I get to decide what I want. I feel comfortable in whatever context in sharing a little more about myself. And so that's the problem to solve for with privacy. Unfortunately, people, refer to privacy coins and think just being anonymous between transactions equals all things privacy. And I just want to make sure that I don't even think anonymity is the main case. It's an edge case, unless what you're trying to do is make a data set, render it anonymous for purposes of within an organization wanting to do more with that anonymous data set, share it with third parties, for instance, or do analytics on it.
Yeah, I really think that's a great distinction, and I'm glad you said it that way, because it's very clear with to the community. I think that privacy is important, but anonymity in terms of what we're doing in this space with Hedera and coins and crypto. I don't even like to call HBAR crypto because it's more of a platform of the future to me. But I think that's really a good distinction that everybody can understand. So we're at the top of the hour, and I wanted to just say to the community, anybody else who would like to speak, just raise your hand, and I'll let you ask a question or have a comment. If not, I want to thank that Debra Farber, the privacy guru on Twitter. Everyone should follow her. She has great posts about all kinds of different issues with regard to privacy. And Tom, you've been great as always, and everyone should be aware of that everywhere is in the healthcare industry, but they also do other development applications. And thank you so much, Jim. If you'd like to say anything to the community, that would be great.
Yeah, just from my perspective, great to connect with you all as always. This is Elizabeth. Thank you for organizing this. This is such a, I think, refreshing way to interact with folks in the community. And I know I see and recognize a number of the I guess avatars, and hopefully we'll get to talk to them in I guess directly in person otherwise too. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Yeah, if you guys need to reach out to me or have questions, feel free to ping me on Twitter. I'm happy to respond. But yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And there's a quick question by Berg, and then we'll continue on. Berg, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I had a question for Debra. And Debra, you make a really great point about anonymity versus privacy. I actually come from a background working with privacy coins like Komodo, Pirate. I'm sure you've heard of a few of them, leveraging zero knowledge proofs and stuff like that. But it really was just about anonymity versus what you're bringing up as far as privacy goes. With what we had built, we had user data balances, sending, receiving addresses, memos, IPs, everything like that, completely anonymous. With Hedera having KYC in a public ledger, one of the issues that I see is if what I was working on before, if we were subpoenaed for information, there wasn't any to give. How do you see that being an issue with something like Hedera, where they have my name and address and everything, and if, say, an organization subpoenaed Hedera for information, where exactly would that go?
So that's a great question. I honestly do not have insight into it from the Hedera side, as I am a contractor. But I thought I just saw some other marketing team members, but I don't see them now. I think they dropped off. So that's a conversation that I can have, and then just we could get back to you on it. Now, I mean, I could talk about it more largely. Like, that is a concern, sure. It's kind of what we have today anyway. You know, there's always going to be tension between, do you have information that persists somewhere so that you can use it? Like, as Jim was explaining, he needs pseudonymous information so that he can provide the privacy preserving assurances externally to others. But that also means, you know, for financial transactions, like you know, a privacy coin could obfuscate that, and you can still, you know, I'm trying to explain how these are different use cases and hard to unpack right here on this call. But what I would say is that there are concerns, especially by the EU that has GDPR, right? Because the US will have, you know, through the Patriot Act, provide, you know, ask for information, and then the company's not allowed to even, you know, state to anybody that they're giving that information over. And this entire scenario is actually anathema to the way that Europe views privacy. And it's one of the several reasons we're not considered an adequate country for protecting privacy,
Right.
which means that we have hurdles to jump over.
We also, part of his question asserted that Hedera has KYC performed on every account, and that's not the case.
Oh, that's not the case. It's on. So I believe that it used to be on every portal account, or it might still be on the portal accounts, but you don't need to be KYC'd anymore. It's just there as an option. Anyone?
No, I think it was pre-OA, wasn't it? Because I remember signing up and I had to go through the KYC because that was the only way you could create a Hedera account was via the portal. But nowadays, right. I mean, you can download Exact Wallet and you can open an account for completely anonymously, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, precisely.
Now it's anonymous.
Yeah. To get on the main net and things, you still need to KYC yourself for Hedera.
Not to open an account. You can just. No. I mean, you can just get an account via any of the wallet apps these days.
Yeah.
But if any company does deploy KYC on Hedera through their app, then yes, they will have this challenge that H. Burge and Mitch are discussing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't want to keep you guys. I know that Debra and Jim have had a super busy day, and we're so happy that they could come on Spaces. And I don't want to keep you all too long. So I really appreciate everybody coming to our Spaces a week. And I just can't thank you enough. I think I'll have to listen to it again to absorb all the information that you gave us, Jim and Debra. And thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. It's always good. Conversations feel like they could go on for a lot longer.
Okay, so I'm going to end this space. And hello.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.